My name is Claudine Letai, digital learning lead. I'm actually sort of thinking around reimagining educational theories in the age of artificial intelligence. And that lovely image is actually generated by DALI. Everybody kind of knows those anyway, hopefully. So we really are at what I would say a brink of a technological revolution. And what the question really arises is how do we really adapt educational frameworks to harness the power of artificial intelligence? So traditionally, our educational theories need to really be re-examined. And I'm going to try and share my view and what I see as a possible direction. And, technology has always been a transformative force, but really, are we ready for the transformation that artificial intelligence actually is likely to achieve? So, and looking at the promise and the challenge thereof. So, traditional learning theories in question that I've just looked at, the two of them, one is Bloom's taxonomy. Really, the main issues around traditional way of looking at Bloom's is kind of like those hierarchy steps of, the first step is actually sort of remembering, making sure that there's understanding, application, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. So really, how do we then look at how these are impacted by artificial intelligence, which can instantly recall and analyze, and what would we say the technical skills or cognitive skills that will become more crucial that would need to actually be applied across education system or systems. I mean, in higher education, it's probably a little bit more different, but really, I think this applies across the board. The proposal of the shift really is how do we look at emphasizing what we would call high order skills like evaluation and creation in this context. And then the question would be, how do we then assess understanding when, artificial intelligence can stimulate comprehension? I mean, I'm assuming everybody here understand how artificial intelligence works, or the generative models work. They really can't think. But they appear to be thinking, they appear to be talking to you in normal language. So that really creates its own trajectory and problem. So this is the reimagined Bloom's taxonomy, which actually really references evaluating when you're actually thinking of adding generative artificial intelligence into your tools when you actually using learning outcomes or activities. So the emphasis here is actually looking at, the natural way when you're thinking, remembering, but here you're actually looking at retrieving information from a list of possible answers, how this actually would be important, like define a term, generative AI could actually define a term for you quite quickly without actually any need for anything. Then how do you construct that basic chronology of understanding and a timeline? So this would actually be more important as opposed to just actually simple remembering, because if a tool can actually do the elements, how do you then assess whether your learners are actually remembering things, are recalling factual information, or can retrieve it? So understanding is sort of like changed really to look at how do you accurately describe concepts in different ways. So because artificial intelligence, again, generative AI would be able to actually give you translation into other words, other languages, and so forth. So the understanding can actually be more present. So you can actually apply it to different learners with different languages. So that allows it to be more understandable. So these are just the ways that other institutions have looked at how they can actually revisit Bloom's taxonomy in the age of artificial intelligence. So by using that sort of like artificial intelligence as a supplementary learning tool that actually help their students. And these are some of the options available. So when we look at constructivism in its actually natural or traditional view, it's actually looking at knowledge, how it's constructed through experience. So how does AI shift this when it can actually provide you with instant answers? How do you make sure that learners are actually having any deep learning? So we could think of, artificial intelligence being used to actually do what we would normally call scaffolding, rather than actually providing a solution. And then you could actually look at how that would actually create experiences where human insight are actually used with AI capabilities to actually create that experience. So it's actually looking at things a little bit more differently. This is a study that was actually done by Sophia Moya and Ma Camacho, which highlights really what they were looking at is, in a sense, they were looking at mobile technology, how actually you could use that to focus learning and direct approach that highlights a kind of like social dimension. But the element that I actually wanted to actually bring about here was how artificial intelligence can be integrated to amplify and enhance principles leading to improved learning experience and outcomes. Why are the issues here? The results here that actually made available, the tool made it actually easily available for the learners. Ubiquity, it's quite important, allowing for them to actually sort of like situate their different needs within this context that allow them to have, and the ease of connectivity and interactivity that actually allowed them to actually use it. So we're already seeing a shift away from traditional input of information. I know most of the systems already have blended learning and all those, so we don't have any of that. But these are sort of like movement away from kind of the traditional way of doing things. So what would we say are emerging educational paradigms that, I don't know, everybody has talked about digital natives, but then there's another theory that's coming up now is actually what is called a AI native learning theory. So this theory really is an approach of reimagining education for an AI enhanced world. I think when we started, we were sort of talking around tools and Microsoft bringing in agents and so forth. So that literally means, all the tools that you'll be using in an office environment will already have embedded within them artificial intelligence or some element of artificial intelligence. So if you're already having those elements or generation that goes up with those tools already in use, you can term those AI natives. So you could actually treat them very differently than you treat somebody that actually has no artificial intelligence knowledge at all, or no experience or contact with it. But the main things that actually are emerging here is, how do we develop learning in that process? How do we develop cognitive skills? And those would be the critical way. Maybe more research needs to be done, but how do we emphasize information literacy and sourcing information? How do you evaluate that, the source of information? Prompt engineering, which would actually be a fundamental skill in my view on using artificial intelligence, understanding capabilities or limitations of the systems that you're using or the tools that you're using. Most commonly, we know that generative AI hallucinates quite a lot. So if you actually prompt engineering it, you have to actually prompt it with the clear instructions. Otherwise, you're going to get lots of information that's actually more likely to be hallucinations. So how do you actually tell which parts are hallucinations and which are not? So more research would need to be done. And how do we have that human artificial intelligence collaboration competencies that actually will make sure that we are constantly assessing it, technology advances in those terms? How do we actually align with that? So these would be the elements that would need us to really think how we really move forward. So I think in my view, we have to be thinking about how we adapt expertise, what we would say moving beyond our traditional expertise to actually building kind of a new AI era, which actually really needs to think about capacity. How do we adapt rapid skill adaptation? Because I don't know, most people that actually work in all our environments recognizes that actually there's actually quite a lot of information around tools, different tools, how to use them, but we still have that huge digital literacy issue that actually most people actually don't know what to use, how to use them, and what would be suitable for different environments. So we need to actually be really looking at really more strategic level on how these workplaces are transformed, and most of those are quite the problems that we actually find. How do we look at novel problem identification? So what are those things? How would we identify them? How then we apply artificial intelligence to ensure that we can resolve them, or more research? And how do we manage what we call AI human workflows? This could be anything, simple processes that actually, maybe iterated by artificial intelligence, having human input into them, and then how do we actually work around those? And it's a changing workplace. We have to actually embrace those. What would be the practical implications? I mean, I'm working on sort of some curriculum redesign, including generative artificial intelligence. So how do we actually design curricula to change the way we have actually been doing things before? So the focus for me would be, what are unique human capabilities? What can be done by artificial intelligence, and which would be things that actually are more unique human capabilities that would actually sort of like kind of work together. The more important area or source that is actually quite important, that's kind of really being used quite broadly at the moment, we have the UNESCO's framework. This is actually quite interesting because it's actually supporting quite lots of policy and so forth. But the new essential skills really would be AI interaction design, which it's a new it's a new skill that will be essential. Data interpretation, because you have to interpret the data that actually comes up. And the key element for me is someone that deals in data and learning, and so it's really that ethical reasoning. How do we then actually distinguish, and how do we actually help to sort out the elements where ethical bias? How do we actually make sure learners and faculty at large actually are able to actually use this with those embedded with ethics? And how do we create that creative synthesis of information that really revolves to actually enforce and support what actually is needed by faculty and generally the workplace? So employability skills actually coming into play there. This is just a model from Evergreen Education that looks at AI literacy model. So the elements here are just really ethics at the core and societal implications. And then around that, you have the human machine collaboration that we're already doing. How do we find the way? So wayfinding. So how do you find information that, or the tool that's suitable for whatever you're doing? What will be regarded as AI essentials? for me, the AI is actually more around literacy, foundations, understanding what artificial intelligence is, and as it progresses, what its capability is and what are the limitations. Future-ready thinking, then you'll actually be linking that to computational thinking as well as critical thinking. Again, so leveraging AI innovation. So then we think about adaptability as well as actually creativity. So we can think about, using DALL-E to actually create images, using LLM MS that actually sort of creates podcasts from what you've actually created. So these are sort of things that you can actually think about. The next is, how do we assess? Assessment revolution would be a key element. For me, we need to actually be thinking about moving beyond traditional testing. We need to actually now think about new approaches. How do we evaluate AI-human collaboration? Do we need a platform to do that? Do we use open source, openly available, so publicly available sources like ChatGPT, or do we need to actually use specifically created edtech tools that actually will make sure that you are able to actually assess how much the interaction between the learner and the material is in and what outputs have been put in there? So that's something that we will actually have to be thinking about. How do we measure adaptability to the systems? How do you also assess critical thinking when we actually have AI in context? Should we actually be looking more portfolio-based demonstration where we use hybrid intelligence, meaning artificial intelligence and human intelligence, together to actually see how someone would actually, we need to be thinking really broadly, how do we change our rubrics? How do we actually include those within those contexts? So this is a really big area. Above all, the most important part is that how then do we develop our teachers? The role of educators changes. And how do we actually look at those changes? I mean, we're no longer having people actually doing kind of the direct teaching. We will actually be looking at new roles like AI integration specialists. We will look at human skills developers. We will look at ethics guides. We will look at learning experience designers. So these are sort of like the few roles that I see as, kind of really developing in this space that actually changes the game. And most of the time, this is just the UNESCO AI competency framework for teachers that really sort of like puts all these elements into play. But what I see as the most important thing is most of the time, what we see in education is maybe quite a lot of systems that are hard to change. And most of the time, what you would see is technology coming in to really disrupt those areas. And I think actually we are at the verge of actually a huge disruption in education overall, higher education, maybe even worse. So I'm sort of looking at those things. These are some studies that were done by Microsoft, November 2023, the AI in education. So they were just looking at how artificial intelligence is being used and by educators, by students. So the levels here, we can see the leaders are kind of like the most that are using it, but students are sort of least using it. But we've actually seen quite a clamp down on academic integrity in most universities. I don't know how many universities actually have policies that are really saying, the plagiarism that's associated with artificial intelligence. But my thought is that maybe that's the wrong way of looking at it. We need to actually be ensuring that our learners are future ready, and artificial intelligence is actually being used everywhere. In particular, in my area, a lot of law firms already actually have their own models that they're using it at the moment. So it is actually quite interesting to see how this, and there's new programs that are being created. I'm aware that there's now innovation specialists within law firms that are actually now being taken on by law firms, not only as training contracts, which actually sort of like it's a new way of actually doing things, who are looking at processes and how to use or leverage technology to actually change the processes and reduce the amount of time that's meant on tasks that normally take long, like simple research, drafting, discovery. Any of those elements are now being done a little bit more differently. And these are huge firms that are actually, investing quite a lot of money on those changes. So the future considerations I would put forward is that actually we need to be looking at some new ethical framework. We need to look at research with long-term impacts. We need to look at new pedagogical models. How do we then measure hybrid intelligent outcomes? So our outcomes has to be different when we are actually having artificial intelligence and human input. So we have to actually be making those changes. So the main concerns, as always in education, it's really around academic integrity. How do you measure knowledge and learning and so forth? So those are important things then to look on. This is one research that was done recently, AI tutoring outperforming active learning. So really interesting stuff that's actually out there. So in conclusion, really, we need to actually be thinking about continuous adaptation of educational theory. We need to actually balance technological integration with human development. We need to think about a new education paradigm that honors both human and artificial intelligence, because my feeling is that it's not going away. The key questions that really I would leave everybody with to consider. I'm doing some research on education and looking at, South African context, developing countries, starting it from the bottom, thinking about those elements of AI natives. How do we actually sort of leverage those to actually really disrupt how education has been done before? And I think that will probably change quite a lot of areas. So my question is here for you, maybe to ponder: how do we preserve the essence of human learning while leveraging artificial intelligence capabilities? What new theories of learning do we need to develop? Because I think some of the ones that we have are outdated. How can we ensure educational equity when we have AI-enhanced learning environment? So those are my key questions, and these are some of the page analysis of learning outcomes with personalized AI generated educational podcasts. These are some of the resources I've actually looked at. I'm happy to actually provide some thoughts. And like I said, I'm really looking at a platform that actually is dedicated to changing education in developing countries, really starting in my native country.